Hello, and welcome to What Zombies Can Teach Us About Surviving the Apocalypse, which is a super spooky event brought to you by Future Tense and the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University. My name is Mia Armstrong Lopez, and I am the managing editor at Future Tense, which is a partnership between Slate, New America, and Arizona State University that explores tech, society, and the future through events like this one, and also through articles that we publish on slate.com. I would also be one of the first people to die in the zombie apocalypse. So I'm very excited to be joined today by two people who would definitely make it out alive. And they are Athena Actopus and Colton Scrivener. Athena is an associate professor at the ASU Department of Psychology, assistant director of research at the ASU Global Futures Laboratory, the co-director of the Human Generosity Project, and the president and founder of Zombified Media. Athena is also the author of the forthcoming book, A Field Guide to the Apocalypse, which will be out in April of next year. And it's a really very delightful and useful guide to preparing for many different sorts of end times. It includes amazing sketches and art. It includes checklists. It includes fun ideas for apocalyptic parties. So she really has it all in there. You'll definitely want to check it out. And Colton is a behavioral scientist at the Recreational Fear Lab at Aarhus University in Denmark, a research project manager at Arizona State University, and the director of the annual Eureka Springs Zombie Crawl. Colton researches the evolutionary and psychological underpinnings of our fascination with the darker side of life, including horror, true crime, and all types of scary play. And he's currently working on a book to come out mid-next year about the science behind morbid curiosity. It's tentatively titled Dark Minds, Soft Hearts. So Athena and Colton, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having us. This is really fun.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we're going to start. I thought it would be helpful to start with some rapid fire definitions, because I think we're going to be talking about concepts today that we all sort of have a handle on, but maybe there are some nuances that you all might be able to prompt for us in terms of the way that we think about these sort of different terms or concepts that we throw around, especially this time of year. And so I'm going to give you, and I also realize that the terms that I'm going to ask you to define might be terms that would merit 7 paragraphs of definition in a research paper. So I'm going to do the challenging thing of asking you to define them in 20 seconds. I'm going to have my timer ready. And Athena, I would love to start with you and ask you to define for us the term apocalypse.
Ooh, apocalypse. Well, a lot of people think the apocalypse is like the end of times. But as I like to say, I don't think the apocalypse has to be the end of the world. In fact, if we look at how ancient Greeks defined apocalypse, they defined it as a revelation of sort of the underlying reality. And so if we think about the apocalypse as like, an event that actually tells us about the landscape of risk that exists, like reveals that, then I don't know, that really changes, I think, how we approach the apocalypse.
Okay, I love it. 30 seconds, but we'll give it to you because apocalypse is a large term. The second term that I want to ask you to define for us here is zombies.
Zombies. Okay. Zombie is an entity that is fully or partially under the control of an entity that is genetically distinct from it in one way or another.
Okay, excellent. That one was 15 seconds, so you made up for time there. Colton, I want to turn to you. So as we mentioned, a lot of your work focuses on this idea of morbid curiosity. So can you define that for us?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear the term morbid curiosity, think that it's a bad or pathological curiosity because that's what morbid means in medical settings. But really, I'm just referring to an interest in or curiosity about things that are dangerous or could kill you.
Okay, excellent. 15 seconds, very good. And then the final term that I want to ask, and this is another thing that you explore a lot in your work and through also activities like the Eureka Springs Zombie Crawl, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, but this idea of scary play.
Yeah, scary play is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's engaging with scary things in a playful way. And it kind of, that playful framework allows you to approach these things that might otherwise be scary and kind of learn about them, learn how to deal with them, and have fun while doing it.
Okay, excellent. 15 seconds again, so very good.
Colton
So
won. Colton won that
Colton did
one.
win. Colton did win. I wasn't going to
Yeah.
say it because I wanted to start off nice, but Colton did win.
I also didn't have to define the apocalypse, which is kind of hard to.
That's true. That's true. Maybe it was a little bit rigged from the beginning. But thank you for humoring me with those definitions. I do think it's really helpful. And we can kind of dig into them a little bit more as the conversation continues. And now that we've done definitions, I want to do a little bit of history, and I want to look specifically at the history of zombies. And I think this is particularly interesting, because it's often left out, I think, from the way that we engage with like modern pop culture zombies. But the original archetype of the zombie has been traced back to slavery in the 1600s in Haiti, where it was representing kind of this idea of being trapped in one's own body without having control over it, the idea of not being able to return home, kind of the sort of cruelty wrapped up in that whole system. And after the Haitian Revolution, the idea of a zombie began to shift, getting picked up and incorporated into voodoo religious traditions. And then we have movies like in the 1930s, The White Zombie, The Night of the Living Dead in the 60s, The Dawn of the Dead in the 70s. Then we start to get The Walking Dead, and we inch closer toward, this sort of zombie industrial complex that we have today. So Athena, as someone who is engaging with all of this, thinking about zombies a lot, I would love to kind of start with you. What meaning would you say that all of this history gives to the way that we engage with zombies today?
Well, that's a great question. And, if we do look at the original idea of the zombies, people were not afraid of zombies. They were afraid to become zombies, right? They were afraid to have their autonomy taken from them. And so I think the very original idea of sort of a zombie as an entity, as an individual that is somehow hijacked, is actually very close to the way that I like to use zombies as, both a metaphor and also as a description of things that are actually happening in the world, right? So there are a lot of organisms in the natural world that get hijacked by entities that are different from them, right? So, in The Last of Us, right, there was the cordyceps fungus, right, that took over humans. Now, in the real world, humans are not susceptible to cordyceps fungus, but there are hundreds of species of insects that are, and they're like different species of cordyceps that specialize on different insects. So there's a whole like zombie ecosystem happening with, just this, one genus really of, this one taxonomic class of potential agents of zombification. So I think that really when it comes to thinking about like what are zombies, yes, like they've kind of come to be this like broader thing that we're like afraid of because maybe they also like represent contagion. They also represent our fears about like dangerous humans. So there's like all of these things that kind of get wrapped up in this zombie idea. But the original notion of just like an entity that's autonomy has been taken away by some other entity that maybe has something to gain from controlling them. That's, I think, a great place to start that has lots of biological and social parallels.
Yeah,
And
no,
I'm gonna like also like punt this over to Colton because like we've chatted about, are zombies like the perfect monster, which kind of ties in with all of this, really.
yeah, Colton,
Yeah.
I would love to hear your answer to that.
Yeah. So a lot of my work on morbid curiosity has suggested that there are sort of these four broad domains of things that we're interested in that could be dangerous to us. So one of those are the potentially dangerous people, right? Minds of dangerous people. These are people typically who are sort of plotting to injure us or harm us. Another one is the paranormals, this idea of sort of disembodied agents or agents that we don't have a lot of information about, like demons or ghosts or aliens or monsters or other kinds of things that we just don't really quite understand, but we think are out there. A third one would be violence itself. So like engaging in acts of violence and kind of the consequences of that. And a fourth one would be injuries that occur to us due to some accident or due to some incident with something dangerous. So sort of bodily injuries, right? And what's interesting is zombies kind of tap into each of those four domains in different ways. So a zombie is sort of human and they sort of want to harm us. So we get that kind of minds of dangerous people aspect. But they're also kind of paranormal in a way because they're dead, but also still kind of alive and moving around. And so we don't fully understand why they're there, what their intentions are, how to stop them necessarily. And of course, they're filled with injuries. So they kind of tap into the bodily injury. And of course, they engage in violence and sort of prey upon us. And so it really hits kind of all four of those domains of morbid curiosity. And so it's sort of a zombie story or a zombie apocalypse sort of has something interesting for almost everyone.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And would you like, does it depend on the person, like what sort of morbid curiosity they're going to be most drawn to, or is one of those stronger than the other three?
Good question. So it does depend on the person. So people who are, high in morbid curiosity tend to be somewhat high in all four, but you can certainly vary, right? You can be much more curious about serial killers than you are about ghosts, for example, or you can be much more curious about bodily injuries than you are about serial killers. And so, yeah, there's kind of this up and down a little bit depending on the person. But of course, zombies, regardless of what thing you're interested in, they have something for you, whether that's bodily injuries or dangerous people or the paranormal or violence itself.
Yeah, and so that intersects with sort of another question that I wanted to ask you, which is like, why? Like, what if someone finds themselves very interested in, like, why are we morbidly curious? If someone finds themselves very interested in serial killers, like, what is the psychology behind that?
Yeah, well, it's not just humans, right? Humans have a lot of opportunities to kind of indulge in their morbid curiosity, but you actually see something like it across the animal kingdom, especially in prey species. So prey species, if you think of like a zebra or a gazelle or something like that, they actually will inspect or try to learn about whatever their local predator is, which is pretty advantageous, right? If you're a prey species, one of your number one goals in life is to not be eaten. But the best way to not be eaten is to learn something about the things that want to eat you, right? The things that want to kill you. And that way you can be prepared for them. Now, the problem is, gazelles and zebras can pretty much only learn about lions if they see them, right? They don't have stories. They don't have anything like that. When you get to humans, we can tell all sorts of stories about possible dangerous things, even dangerous things we've never experienced, like an apocalypse, for example. And so we can really indulge in kind of these stories and learning opportunities about these potential dangers. And our mind kind of sees that as a really good opportunity for learning because those stories are very low cost, right? It's not, for a gazelle to learn about its local predator, it's kind of costly. You're putting yourself at risk of being preyed upon. But for a human to do it, we can sit in the comfort of our home and watch it on a TV, and there's really no cost to us, but the learning benefits are still there.
Yeah, no, that it makes a lot of sense. And in a second, I want to bring some of our audience members in with a poll to kind of, because I would love to kind of gauge the way that they think about how morbid curiosity plays in their own lives. But before we hop over to that, Athena, I did want to ask you, one of my other questions for you was like, why have you found zombies to be useful to help people think through some of this other like preparation for other risks that they face in their lives? And maybe it comes back to this idea of zombies being the perfect monster, but are there other factors in there that you think make zombies particularly useful for these sorts of like imagination and risk exploration that Colton was mentioning?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that the fact that they are kind of this perfect storm in terms of the features that they have, means that they are kind of universal as like, oh yes, this is a threat. And it's a threat that I can engage with some aspect of my curiosity, right? Like, so, and maybe for some people, they're still like too scary. Like I have close colleagues who are like, I can't do the zombie thing. It's like too scary for me, right? So maybe for some people there isn't like an in still that's like with the curiosity, but I think for a lot of people there is a way to be, interested in them that's fun and playful. And so I think that's really, important for kind of creating a tone and an environment where people can engage without being stressed, right? So if you can explore possible futures, possible scenarios with a sort of creative, playful, improvisational kind of mindset, like, oh, could I survive this? Like, what would I do? Then you're just in a mental space where you can consider possibilities. You don't just go into sort of like fight or flight mode. And so, when it comes to considering, all right, like, what would we do in a flood or in a wildfire, if there was an earthquake? Like, those things can be very scary and almost like triggering to even just imagine that happening. But if instead you're like, well, what if it was a zombie apocalypse where like the zombies had features that actually set up a scenario that's like it would be if there was a wildfire, right? So you can do that. You can like play with how the zombies are to like create these scenarios that then let you think through how you would deal with certain things in a playful way without, necessarily having that fear response of, imagining something genuinely horrific happening to your neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that's so helpful. And it was one of the things when I was thinking about this conversation today is like, in some ways, like some of we're kind of trying to have fun with some of these apocalyptic scenarios. And I was like, well, I don't want to, I don't want to be nonchalant about like the consequences or like the urgency of like these very real disaster scenarios that we might run through. But it's almost like, like you're saying, it's like our brains are like so traumatized that what I do is I like think about those things and then I just like shut them into this closet in my brain and I close the door and I like never want to engage with it again. And so if there's like a way through these kind of more imaginative, more fun kind of explorations to like open the door and be like, oh no, these are actually things that it is better if they're not shut off in the closet. It is better if we're thinking through them and being prepared, but it's almost kind of like hacking your brain to be able to do so, it feels like.
Yeah, and other animals do that too, right? They have to practice, how to hunt and how to escape from being hunted. And, being in that sort of playful frame helps them do that in a way that's entertaining, so they learn a lot, but also not too scary for them.
Yeah. And so I would love to kind of gauge how the audience feels about some of these things. So for those of you who are joining us online, we're going to go ahead. My colleague Alex is going to launch a poll question for us. And so if you go to the right of your screen, you should see kind of like a column for Q&A, and then you should also see a column for a poll. And right now we have a poll question that is live for you all to be able to vote in. And the question is, when I engage with true crime podcasts, zombie movies, haunted houses, vampire fiction, etc., my primary motivation is to escape from the real world, learn about myself and how I respond to scary situations, or learn about dangers in the world. And if you're like me, like you're probably like, where's option B? All of the above. But we purposely set it up to try and get you to engage with your primary motivation. You're like 34% answer here. So I'll give folks just a second to vote. All right, I'm going to give folks like 10 more seconds. And then we can talk through some of these answers.
What's yours, Colton? I don't even know what yours is. We talk about this stuff all the time.
Primary motivation. Well, I think it's tough because when you talk about motivation, sometimes or often our motivations are not
known to us.
Our true motivations are not always conscious to us. Yeah, we can become aware of them, right? But they're not all. They're kind of running in the background, and we can kind of tap into that and figure it out. But if you ask someone, why did you go watch the new Halloween movie, right? They're gonna say because I like Halloween movies and it was fun, right? That's that's their motivation,
right? But
that doesn't say why do humans seek out scary stories in general, right? That's also there's a motivation for why we do that. So I mean, my conscious motivation would be, well, it's fun and I enjoy it, and it's I enjoy it. That would be the simplest one, but the real motivation, I think, is that it's my brain sees it as a cheap way to learn about things that are dangerous, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think that's actually reflected, Colton and Athena, I don't know if you can see the answers here, but so 70% of folks said that they use it to escape from the real world. 22% said that they use it to learn about themselves and how they respond to scary situations. And 7% said to learn about dangers in the real world. But I think that's perhaps like reflective of what you're saying, right, Colton, is like, there is like sort of an evolutionary motivation, and then there's like the way that it manifests itself to us and the way that we're interpreting it. Athena, what would you... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Colton.
Oh, I was just going to say it's kind of it's a funny thing if, if it really is, ultimately about escapism, then why would we escape something scary or even pleasant? Some of us have pleasant lives. Why would we
Right.
escape a pleasant life to dive into a story that's unpleasant? That doesn't feel like escapism, right? That feels like something else.
Yeah. Well, and Athena, I want to hear what your answer would be in a second, but just that kind of raises another question for me, which is like sometimes I think one of the, when I think about true crime in particular, right? So Colton, I know you do some work on true crime and why we enjoy engaging with that. And I think, things have gotten much more nuanced lately, but sort of the traditional true crime narrative seems to be like, there's a violation of justice. There's like a pursuit of an investigation, a pursuit of justice. And then at the end, there's like, we're achieving justice, right? It's like the law and order narrative arc. And some part of that seems like, when I think about the chaos of the world, like something about these like clean, predictable narratives like feel very satisfying to me. But so I wonder if you think like that's part of folks' attraction to some of these things, and like if so, how does that kind of shift our ability to like transport some of these cleaner and imagine things within cleaner narratives to like the sort of messier realities of our world?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, unless you're kind of an adrenaline junkie, for a lot of people, if you have an unresolved story, then that's more unsettling, right? I mean, part of what probably goes on when you engage in scary play is that when you finish it, when it's complete, your body's parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest, the one that helps you relax, sort of kicks into high gear and gives you that kind of relaxing feeling. And you hear this a lot with people. They'll say, "Oh, I turn on forensic files to relax or go to sleep at night," which just sounds crazy, right? Like you turn on true crime to go to sleep to relax. That part of what might be going on is that you actually do get a relaxation feeling from some of those towards when the story finishes and it's wrapped up neatly, right? So I think that has some to do with it. But what's interesting is some of the really early, so like right when the printing press was invented, some of the first things that were printed off were essentially stories of true crime, or as we would recognize them today. And those stories didn't always have these justice heavy endings, right? They would sometimes just be very descriptive account. Like one of the earlier ones was a woman who murdered her 4 kids and then killed herself. And there was no like real justice or end to it, right? It was just a story about this horrible thing that happened. And so I think that, justice definitely has something to do with it, certainly for some people more than others. But I think a lot of that has to do with too, if you're learning about something, if I tell you a story and there's no resolution, I don't really feel like I learned as much, right? Because I didn't learn how to overcome or defeat the thing, or I didn't learn like how to stop it. I just learned that it's really bad, which is still learning something, but it's not quite as good as learning how to overcome it, right? Or how to see it through to the end.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Athena, I'm really curious what you would say, like when you think about the ways that you engage with some of this content, maybe in particular zombies, like, do you use it as an escape? Would you say you use it as an escape? Do you use it to learn about yourself? Do you learn it to learn about the world? How do you kind of think through that question?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I like never was really into like horror or zombie stuff until I kind of like started getting interested in it as like a tool for engaging with things and like a tool for science communication and all that. So like it's kind of like I've come around to like, oh, actually this is really fun, like kind of through like the back door of it. So I appreciate that it's like fun and that, you do kind of get transported to a different world that you can engage in. But for me, I mean, I think it's a combination of the last two, probably like, learning about myself and how I respond, like that's fun, to kind of challenge myself. I also like, I like to do things that are like physically challenging and kind of like see, where my limits are. And I think like, horror is like a, mental, emotional, cognitive version of like kind of pushing yourself a little bit. And then, I also do think that like there are a lot of horror movies that are actually really great at kind of like painting a picture of like, okay, if this and this and this happened, here are like, some of the potential things that could happen in human society or in like, you know, in medicine, or, you know, like if they're well done stories, then they just like, you know, bring one or two like new things in and then kind of like follow like what might happen. And I think that like those are really those are really compelling and interesting because they do, you know, bring you into an alternate kind of world and help you to kind of like fill that world out in a way that lets you reason about things, like what, you know, what things might be like, what problems might exist, how you might solve
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
And is there like, not to put you on the spot, but is there like an example of like a movie, a TV show, a book, like some piece of work that you think in particular does a really good job of that?
Um, well, one of my like favorite zombie movies of all times is Train to Busan, which is, you know, it's like really this story about, um, you know, how like people can be sort of very invested in sort of like appearances and like so, you know, social class and sort of, you know, differences, but that like, you know, ultimately when there's a threat like zombies, like the aspects of human nature that have to do with like helping each other and working together, like those kind of like come to the fore and start to transcend like all of these like, you know, other things that we usually sort of like divide ourselves, you know, on. And I think it's a really brilliant movie that you know, like there's just like a very good intuitive understanding of like very complex things with human nature in terms of like cooperation and like kinship. And um it like paints this really great picture of sort of like, you know, fundamental social challenges in times of disaster, using the zombie apocalypse as a backdrop. And it's like it's kind of a serious zombie movie. It's not like a, you know, silly horror movie, but like there are also lots of moments of like humor and lightheartedness like within it. So and it's beautifully shot too. So it's kind of, you know, it provides like a lot of like really like entertaining and engaging things while at the same time taking you through sort of like, you know, social and cultural and class kind of issues that might arise in a disaster situation.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think it's, you know, when folks were registering for this event, we kind of asked them about what they thought was like the biggest vulnerability in their community, like in a sort of apocalyptic situation. And, you know, the most common answer there was like a lack of cohesion and stability, like people worrying about it would be every person for themselves, polarization. And, you know, I think I really shared that worry too. But then I think also about like the sort of like disaster situations that I've been in, like earthquakes, wildfires, like these, you know, I mean, I was going to say pandemic, like obviously there's like big exceptions, right? Like there's big exceptions, but it's like you definitely can find these pockets of like human resilience that do feel like sort of inspiring, or that they might kind of break with this pattern that we often have kind of in our minds about how humans will react under pressure.
Absolutely. And, you know, if you look at historical examples like, you know, after the great earthquake in San Francisco at the turn of the century, there's just a huge amount of spontaneous cooperation. You know, people helping each other without expecting anything in return. Um, sorry, even, you know, like public transportation, or, you know, the transportation system was just like running for free. Stores and restaurants were giving food away for free. I mean, everyone was just, you know, trying to help everyone else. And you see this often in the week or two after a disaster, that people are just sort of like in a mode of like helping anybody they can, anybody who needs help, and not really, you know, operating in the standard kind of like market transactional way that we usually operate in.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like it almost feels like in the maybe like when I'm thinking back through the pandemic, like if you think about the first few weeks in like March of 2020, it was like everyone was you know, applauding nurses and doctors at a certain hour and like kind of coming together in this way. And then it seems like maybe there's like apocalypse fatigue after a while and things kind of start to deteriorate. But this idea that you're mentioning of like kind of building up like or like kind of communities coming together, like spontaneous community resilience or kind of community interdependence. Do you think like I'm curious, Colton, for your perspective on this. Like, can we train that? Can we like train our communities so that that is a more likely reaction after different apocalypses?
I think it's easier for certain things than others. With something like an earthquake or a hurricane or a tornado or a fire, I think everybody is in agreement that those are dangers, that's dangerous and they are dangers, right? And so it's very easy for us to come together and help each other when we all agree what the threat is and that it is a threat. I think what we see happening sometimes with infectious diseases, for example, like with the pandemic, but also probably just any kind of pandemic, um, certain people are going to, I think everybody saw it as a threat initially because it was new and scary and we didn't know a lot about it. And so we were all on the same page that this is something that is very threatening. And that helped us kind of come together. I think as the pandemic wore on, I don't know if there was certainly some fatigue going on. I think everybody felt that. But I think something else that was happening was that people's perceptions of what was most threatening and how threatening it was changed, right? Some people thought now the lockdown was more threatening to my personal, economic situation or my family situation, or some people thought, well, the pandemic is still, the virus itself is still more threatening, and it's more threatening than I thought it was before. And so people began to diverge a little bit, I think, on both their perception of how threatening it was and what the real threat was, right? And I think that's what divides us, right? That's what began to divide us, and I think still sort of divides us. So I think, can we teach it? Maybe, but I think it would require us to essentially get on the same page about what the threat is and how threatening it is. And I think that's really hard to do. It's not impossible, but that's definitely
Colton,
the task, right?
Obviously, the real threat is the zombies.
The zombies, yeah.
Maybe
that's why zombies are great.
Right?
Everybody agrees that zombies are the threat, right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting. And this is one of the things that I wanted to ask you about as it relates to like scary play. It reminds me of the events like zombie crawls, right? Like, as I mentioned, you're the director of the Eureka Springs zombie crawl, which I read online brings up to 20,000 people to a small town of like, 2,000 people, something around there. So like 10-to-1 zombie ratio, pretty impressive. Zombie to human ratio, that's pretty impressive. And I'm wondering, like, for the uninitiated, if you could explain like what a zombie crawl is and like what it actually helps people do in terms of like when we're thinking about community preparedness for different risks.
Yeah, it depends. There are lots of different zombie walks and zombie crawls that happen around the U.S. And each one's a little bit different. Some of them are pub crawls. Some of them are just walks where people just dress up as zombies and walk. In our case, it's kind of an all-day event where people come dressed up as zombies, or they have makeup artists like help them out the day of, and there's music and all kinds of things. That people are just kind of dressed up spooky and acting spooky all day, and then there's a nighttime parade, or sort of a dusk parade that happens where they parade through the streets with zombies and zombie hunters, and people dress up their cars as these apocalypse vehicles. And I think, not every place has like a zombie walk or a zombie parade or a zombie crawl, right? In our case, I think what it does is it helps us understand what happens when there's a 10-to-1 ratio of anyone in the town, right? That's a huge influx of people that puts a lot of strain on the infrastructure. But I think, you can get this in different kinds of ways. Like, if your town doesn't have like a zombie crawl or a zombie parade or something, surely there are haunted houses or other kinds of things that you can engage in. You can even watch these apocalyptic movies, and it's because, human imagination is very rich. Like, we can easily imagine these kinds of things without necessarily having to have an event like that itself in our town.
Yeah. Maybe I can add on too that, please. Like, this idea of, having a zombie invasion in your town and then using that not just as like a fun, festival event that's like Halloween themed and a party, but that can actually like leverage that to engage people in like, well, how do we manage the risks of disasters? This is something that Colton and I are starting to explore as part of our work and our research on collective risk management. So it's a new area, it's a new approach, but there's a lot of evidence that if you engage people with stories and with play, that those are good tools for getting people to engage. And so then the question becomes, well, how do you create stories and play that are collective, that help get people so they have their shared attention on threats, right? And like, what are the right way of framing those threats. And so we're really using this as kind of like a jumping off point for, seeing like how, how much we can engage the community,
Yeah.
like in the aftermath of an actual zombie invasion, right? Actual zombie invasion, in the question of, how would your town survive, right? Does that get people like interested and like wanting to, get their shelter in place kit together so that they're ready for, any disaster that would maybe keep them from leaving their house. So a lot of open questions, and I think a lot of, fun opportunities in the future for, doing things that are related to disaster preparedness that are just, more fun and more social and, maybe, give people a greater connection to their community in the process as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, just quickly before we move on, I did want to remind the audience members that we are going to have some time for audience questions at the end. So if you're joining us on Slido, you should see a little column where you can type in your questions, and we'll be taking a look at those in just a little bit. But kind of building off of what you were mentioning, Athena and Colton, one of the things that you all are going to be doing after the zombie crawl is like having an event, which is like, could Eureka Springs actually survive the zombie apocalypse? And this is like a question that I know that in your work, you're going to be kind of deploying in different towns. So if someone is like wondering, like if I'm wondering if my hometown can survive the zombie apocalypse, like what questions do I go through to like arrive at the answer to that kind of dilemma?
Athena, you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll start and then you can jump in too if you want. So I think there's a couple of different sort of levels of preparation. So, one question is how ready are households to be able to shelter in place? So essentially if every household has what they need to stay indoors for 72 hours, either because, they themselves have the resources, or we have like, ways of supporting people maybe who don't have the resources to put those in place. Because not everybody, right, can just put together a kit that's going to cost, $200 or something, right, that will allow them to be ready. So we have to think of, how do we support households in being ready? But by framing things, in terms of, the zombie apocalypse, right? Then it could be like, okay, well, get your shelter in place kit together, make sure that you're ready. So in case the zombies come, you can stay in your house for 72 hours. So that would be, one really important thing is to what extent are households ready? And then you can start to sort of look outside of households and say, okay, how is the infrastructure? Like how, would people be able to get to a safe place if they needed to leave their homes? Would they be able to walk? Would they be able to bicycle? Would they be able to drive? Right? If evacuation needs to happen, essentially, is there infrastructure that will allow that to happen and happen safely? And then you can start asking questions also about, trust, right? Among neighbors, in, your community, in your region. Also trust with, government agencies and law enforcement, right, who might be giving instructions to help coordinate activities. Those are just some examples, right, of things that would be potentially very important in a zombie apocalypse, but also are very relevant to being able to survive and thrive in any number of disasters that could occur.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And both of you wrote a article for Slate for Future Tense kind of before this event, where you walked folks through like the different questions that they should ask themselves to prepare for the zombie apocalypse, but like more concretely to prepare for these sorts of other apocalypses. And it was interesting to me because I grew up in a place where there were lots of wildfires, and so it was like we always had this idea that like yes, we should have like a go bag, right, or something that you can grab where you have food and water and your important documents. They should all be in one place. And then like inevitably, it's like every time there's a wildfire, it's like wait, but the birth certificate, where is it? Like this, like it's these sort of things that it's like a broccoli type of thing. Cause you're like, yeah, I know that I should do this, but it's hard. So when I was starting to think about it as like, oh, no, wait, okay, the zombies are coming. Like, okay, I can be in my house for 72 hours if I have these things, but then eventually I have to leave my house because, there's no more water. So then I have my bag and, how well am I going to be able to, how quickly can I bike away from the zombies? Like, these sorts of things. Like, what is the route that I would take to avoid the zombies while I'm trying to get to the hospital or the train station or whatever. So anyway, I think that was like a really kind of helpful way to get people to kind of, again, think through these situations and get ourselves prepared. And it
Yeah,
actually kind of, sorry, no, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say it makes it more like a fun thing rather than like eat your broccoli, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, and I think so I actually wanted to ask both of you, thinking about so this idea that we should all have like an apocalyptic go bag, right? So there's two things that we should have from my understanding, right? It's like you have your shelter in place kit, which is what you need to survive in your house for 72 hours, say, right? So food, water, the different, if the electricity goes out, flashlights, batteries, etc. And then there's like the kind of to go version of that, which is your go bag. And so I wanted to ask both of you, like beyond sort of the obvious things that we know, right? Like your passport or your food and water, like thinking through each of your apocalyptic go bags, like what are 5 things that you would place in there? So those could be like actual objects, or they could be like fuzzier concepts that you feel like you need to have prepared to survive the apocalypse. Colton, I would love to start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think, and probably this is true of anybody's go bag, but you need a first aid kit, right? Because you're going to be out. The doctor, you can't just go to the doctor if you get a cut or a scrape or something, right? So definitely a first aid kit, a flashlight, because I think humans are not used to just not having lights, and if the grid goes out, it gets really dark at night, especially if you're in a rural place. So flashlight definitely, a good knife, because it's just a good utility tool for a lot of different things. Athena talked me into duct tape as being a good one. So duct tape is good, because you can use it to repair almost anything. Like, or if you need to make a quick shelter and you can't, like, you can. It's really useful, like, in a lot of different ways. And then my 5th one, I thought about this. I think it would actually be a really good pair of like work gloves, because if you're in the apocalypse and you're out and about, you're going to be using your hands a lot, whether that's building shelter or trying to pry open a door or whatever it might be. And your hands will get beat up really quickly if you're not used to that kind of thing. And if your hands get beat up when you're out in the apocalypse, you're going to be at a huge disadvantage. It's a huge vulnerability, because as humans, we use our hands for almost everything. So a good pair of gloves to protect your hands, I think, would be something that would be useful.
Okay, noted. And the duct tape, if there's a hole in the gloves, then the duct tape can repair the
Or
hole. So it's just like, oh, yeah.
I think the duct tape is for, I mean, I would imagine it's for like building shelters or anything like that. Your bag gets a hole in it, like you have your actual bag and it rips on something, your shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many things you could use it
You
for.
can also like use duct tape to like essentially like old school 3D print like anything. You could like make like a little like water, carrying thing. You could make yourself a hat. You could make yourself like you could use it to like make almost anything.
Right, I love it.
Yeah.
Duct tape has not sponsored this segment, but we are pro duct tape. Athena, what about you? Like, what are things that you would kind of draw in your apocalyptic go bag?
Yeah. So I'm gonna start with like like the basics. So I'm a big fan of Schwa Fi Fu, which is shelter, water, fire, food, as just like a great like place you start for like what you need. So shelter, that could be like like a really good jacket, right? Or it could be like an emergency blanket, right? So like that the emergency blankets are like tiny. Or if you have more room, it could be like a thin wool blanket or some layers, right? So like shelter could mean a lot of different things. But yeah, like an emergency blanket, I would say would be like the best like version of shelter, because you can also like use it to like block the sun if you need to like be under it, or like there's many different things you can do with it, and it's like so small and so light. It's like the size of a credit card, so you could just like easily have that like with you really anytime. Water. So in my go bag, I have like a little bit of water, but then I also have a life straw, which basically allows you to drink out of anything for quite a while. You can also get like iodine pills and like so basically so you can drink water. So some ability to drink water. Fire, so I have both matches and a lighter. I have some very, very remedial understanding of how to make a bow drill. And I've never actually started a fire with a bow drill. I've seen it happen. I would definitely start working on those skills if I knew that, my time with a lighter and matches was limited. And then food. So like I have a brick of like extremely dense it's basically like shortbread. It's like
Astronaut
emergency
food? Okay.
rations.
Okay.
So that way, I know that I would have food. So I would say those four. And if I'm, with Colton and he's already got the duct tape, then I'm going to take my ukulele as number 5. So
Amazing. Yes. Because one of the things that you all put in this list that you prepared for the article on Slate was like something to pass the time, right? Is like this something to make you feel like you're not just surviving the apocalypse like physically, but you're also like you're still there. You're kind of still yourself.
Yeah.
And just to kind of continue through here, I think one of the imagining these sorts of different apocalyptic scenarios, right? One of the parts that I really enjoyed about your forthcoming book, Athena, was you kind of walk people through different potential apocalypses that are on the horizon, and you walk them through like the things that they should think about and potentially prepare there. And so I want to kind of walk both of you through a similar activity. So I have a list of different potential apocalypses, and I want to have you rank them on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Like 1 being like, we're okay, like no need to stress too much about that one, and 5 being like, yikes, this is probably it. This might be like the capital T apocalypse. And just we can kind of give people a guide of what sort of apocalypses they should really be thinking through. So the first one, and I'll just have we'll just do the numbers without explanation, right? So the first one is infectious disease or pandemic. Colton, I'll start with you. 1 to 5.
And 1 is low, 5 is high,
1 is
right?
low, 1 is like we're probably okay, 5 is like probably not okay.
And no explanations why.
No explanations.
2.
Okay. Athena?
4.
Okay. Asteroid. Colton?
Maybe a 1.
Okay. Athena?
Yeah, at the moment 1.
Okay, good. That's a good one. Nuclear war, Athena.
4 plus.
Okay. Colton?
Yeah, that varies by the year, I feel like.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give it a 3.
Okay. Biological warfare, Athena.
2.5.
Okay. Colton?
Yeah. A 2.
Okay. Climate crisis, Colton.
A 1.
1. Okay. Athena.
3.
Okay. AI takeover, Colton.
3.5.
Okay. Athena.
1.5.
Okay. And then last one, zombies, Colton.
Like real zombies.
Real zombies.
I gotta go with a 1.
Okay.
1.
Athena.
Well, if it includes like any kind of entity that can hijack another entity that is genetically different from it, then I'm gonna give it a 5.
Okay. Well, so I wanted to ask you guys to explain your highest answers. So Athena, explain why.
Yeah. So I mean, if we think about zombies as anything that hijacks something else, that could include infectious diseases, right? That hijack their hosts. It could include, somebody getting a like wrong idea in their head that makes them like push the nuclear, button. It could include, AI takeover. It could include like so many things. It could include just like, memes that go viral and then polarize society and create a civil war, right? Like there's so many things that could happen that could create real zombies in that sense of the word zombie. So
Okay, that's pretty convincing. Colton, I think your highest one, if I'm not wrong, was AI
Yeah.
takeover.
And yeah, I think I chose that one because actually my highest wasn't mentioned. My highest would be aliens. I think
Okay.
we're in trouble if
Well, why
aliens
don't,
ever come.
yes, let's do aliens then. What,
Yeah,
why
that would be like a
aliens?
5.
Okay, a 5.
Because I think that for a lot of the same reasons I ranked AI a little bit higher. I don't think that I think we would all be on the same page that they're a threat, which is good. That's a +1, means we would probably cooperate. The problem is, I think we would cooperate and try to take them out. And I don't know that that would necessarily be the best decision. I think we would be a little bit trigger happy when it came to aliens, and I think that could lead us down a bad path, maybe. And I think that with AI, there's something similar where we're not really. I think we're not in agreement about like countries are not in agreement about how much of a danger it is, and I don't think anyone really knows, right? But the problem is some countries think it's not a big deal, and some countries do think it's a big deal, which means we are not aligned on what we should do. And so I think there's just more uncertainty with AI and with aliens than there are with other things. I mean, humans have, I think, experienced a lot of those other, the exception of zombies, maybe. But though Athena's definition, maybe not. But I think humans have experienced a lot of those other situations before, and we've found ways to overcome them, especially infectious diseases. I mean, that's something that life in general has always battled with. Um, yeah, I think AI and aliens are the things that we know the least about and the things that we'd be least prepared for.
Yeah.
So, Colton, are you just worried about like humanoid intelligent alien life or like also like, microscopic alien life that could come
Yeah,
in and
yeah.
we wouldn't even know that it
I think
was.
that would be the most dangerous pandemic one to me because again, we just don't know how to deal with it, right? Um, we can kind of fumble our way through things that we know a little bit about until we figure it out. But if it's something brand new, and we saw this with COVID a little bit, and COVID's not brand new, right? The coronavirus itself is not brand new, but this version of it was sort of new, and we fumbled around a lot, right? We made a lot of mistakes, we got some things right, but if we had something entirely new that we had never seen before, I think it just is inherently much more difficult to know what the best route is. It's more difficult to know how to manage our costs and benefits and the risks of making certain decisions.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And this is another one of the things that we asked folks for when they were kind of registering for this event. And kind of the consensus, as much as we could tell among folks' answers, was like lots of folks were very worried about climate, right? And the way that kind of intersects and occasions many other kind of
Yeah.
disasters. But at the same time, we had another event a couple weeks ago where we were kind of gauging people on this, and similarly, like people seem very, very concerned with climate, but also at the same time, like when you ask them, like, do you think that human resilience, like, do you think that we're going to be able to kind of get it together and correct and work together to like many people had like a high level of confidence in that. So I think, that's like another like really interesting way of like imagining these scenarios is like, what are we most afraid of? But like, okay, what skills do we have? And like, how can we kind of bring them together? Like Athena, you call it like your Z team, your zombie team. Like, so what skills do we have as like a species that we can maybe bring together and like try and avert these sort of apocalyptic threats? And so we're coming up on the hour here, but before we kind of transfer over into just a couple of audience questions, I want to bring folks in one more time with a poll question. And this one, Athena and Colton, y'all were talking about assessing your individual vulnerabilities and kind of addressing those through like your Go kit or your shelter in place kit. And then also looking at then your community vulnerabilities, right? So like how far is a hospital, how reliable is transportation, et cetera. And so I have a poll question here asking folks for their community's biggest vulnerability to future disasters. So here the options we have are a lack of natural resources, a lack of infrastructure, environmental conditions, and human selfishness / a lack of coordination and cooperation. So I'll give people just a second to vote there. All right, we'll give folks about 5 more seconds to get their votes in.
What were the options again?
Yeah.
Human selfishness / lack of coordination, lack of natural resources, lack of infrastructure, and environmental conditions.
I know what I'm choosing for
What do you
Phoenix.
choose?
The environmental conditions.
Yeah.
Okay. Colton?
Maybe infrastructure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe would depend on the kind of
Yeah.
apocalypse it was.
Eureka Springs is
That's
a pretty
fair.
good place to survive the zombie apocalypse, is the thing, right? Like it's
Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
compared to here, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, Phoenix already feels like the apocalypse sometimes.
Sometimes. So here, I'll read out the kind of explanations that we got here. So 57% said human selfishness, a lack of coordination or cooperation, which was a little bit what we talked about before. That was kind of reflective in some of the things that people mentioned when registering for the event. 19% say a lack of natural resources, 14% say a lack of infrastructure, and 10% say environmental conditions. So maybe we have fewer viewers in Phoenix than we might think.
Wow.
But I actually did, I want to transfer over now to some of the audience questions. And there was actually a question that came in here, like related to what we were just talking about before we transferred over to the poll, which is like both of you kind of ranked in your list of apocalyptic scenarios, climate change or the climate crisis, like on the lower side compared to some of the other threats. So what is it about it? Maybe Colton, we'll start with you, that kind of gives you hope there. Maybe it's not as apocalyptic, just quickly.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things. One is that the world is very focused on that right now. So we are, to the extent we do this, I think people and countries still disagree on it, but we are very focused on it. It's on our radar, right, of things that like could go wrong and things that we need to address. And so I think that that's a plus one for me. That makes it seem less like something that will lead to the apocalypse. I also think that certainly there's been, accelerated climate change recently, but the climate has also changed a lot, I think, over the eons. And is it going to wipe out like all of humans? That seems unlikely to me. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't cause something really like awful to happen over the course of 100 years, 200 years. But I just don't think that the climate changing would wipe out the species. It wouldn't be an apocalyptic event. It would be a really terrible event, but maybe not an apocalyptic event.
Athena, is that similar for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I ranked it like solid, like in the middle, and partially because, I do think that there is attention being put on it now, and there is like the potential for more effective coordination and cooperation around dealing with it. There are also other strategies that are like, there are many strategies that are available for dealing with it. I mean, many of them will take like resources, and there'll be like trade-offs and like, issues of inequality. So it's like a lot of like social complexity around solving the problem. So that's why I, like put it in the middle, because I think still like there are things that we have to figure out in order to be able to deal with it in a way that won't be catastrophic for lots of people, frankly. But I do think that there are ways, there are routes to dealing with it. And, I mean, it's very close to home. It's not even close to home. It is home for me, because I live in Phoenix. Like a few days ago, it was still 100 degrees here, like it was like 95, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness, like it's cooling down, right? So it's real. And in the summers here, if there's a power outage, thousands of people could, just like need hospitalization, and like, it's really, it's intense. So I think and it disproportionately affects people who are more vulnerable, right? Like who are lower income, who have less ability to like leave, the city, right? So there's, I mean, there are a lot of issues that need to be dealt with. No,
I mean, I think that makes sense. And I think it's like what you're saying is like directing attention, right? Like what you're both saying is like, we have some attention directed toward it. We need to direct more attention toward it by like imagining these different things that can go wrong. And so we're kind of like moving there. And the last question just before we sign off here is another audience question. And Athena, I'm going to direct this one towards you. They say, what are the most useful real world applications of studying a zombie apocalypse? Military war games, pandemics, other?
Most useful. I mean, I think that pandemics are a sort of an obvious one where you can use, like the dynamics of a zombie apocalypse to just talk about the dynamics of disease transmission, the dynamics of infection. And that's something that it's hard for people to wrap their heads around, those like, exponential kinds of dynamics right early on. But the idea of like a zombie and then it's like it bites someone and then they turn into a zombie, right? Like that's a very like visceral and visual way of representing, exponential growth dynamics, which, like I said, very hard, just intuitive. It's not very intuitive for us. So I think that that's one of the really great applications. I think it can also be really useful for thinking about, how how is the infrastructure in your city or town for evacuation if that's necessary? Because, you can imagine zombies that mimic different aspects of different kinds of disasters. So I think that there's a lot of potential there. And, I know it's also been, used by the military as a way to, engage, soldiers and people in training about complex scenarios. So I don't personally know much about that other than the fact that it apparently was a lot more fun for everyone who was doing it, including like the instructors and the students. So
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap it up here. We could continue talking about the many different apocalypses that we face for many more hours. And luckily, that's something that I think you all will continue to do in your work. So Athena and Colton, thank you so much for your time and for helping us think through these things. I know that I'm walking away feeling better prepared for confronting the zombie apocalypse or many other apocalypses, and I'm finally going to make my go bag. It's going to be a goal between now and Halloween. So you've inspired me,
awesome.
And I hope that for the audience members too, this has been useful. And I also hope that you will stay in touch with us here on Future Tense. You can follow our work at Future Tense Now on X, which is its own sort of apocalyptic world these days. So enter with caution. But you can also access all of our content on slate.com/future tense. And until next time, thank you all. Happy Halloween and happy apocalypse survival to all of us.